Hello, everybody, and welcome back to This Week in Innovation. Today, I have an old Clubhouse friend, Brandon Rael, Business Transformation Leader at Capgemini Invent. Brandon, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Jeff, for having me. It's a pleasure to meet you, Brian, as well.
Likewise. Welcome, Brandon.
So, Brandon, why don't you start by talking about, we all know Capgemini, but Capgemini Invent is a term that a group that I've just only started to take a look at. So why don't you unpack a little bit about what that is? Tell us about yourself, your background, and what you're doing there.
Yeah, first about my background, as you mentioned in our Clubhouse meeting, I have a deep background in retail, merchandising, supply chain. I actually was a retailer. So I walk the walk, I talk the talk, and I enjoy just solving complex business challenges and enabling through technology advancements and transforming businesses and growing revenue streams. And just halfway through my career, I decided to make the pivot over to consulting. And I joined a number of firms where I focused on business, digital, and technology transformations, and helping to pivot these organizations, especially in the retail space, to the new ways of shopping, new ways of engaging a customer, and especially all the digital innovations have come up the last 5 to 10 years that really focus on the customer journey, the customer experience, and across all the platforms you can imagine. Capgemini Invent is essentially the transformation innovation powerhouse. It doesn't compare to a larger firm. People know that Capgemini is that really Lauries is a significant technology implementation partner that really works with companies for 2 or 4, 5-year engagements that really drives process improvements and is that integration partner you have. But the innovation side, it's really the Capgemini Invent team. It's a conglomeration of about 10 different firms that were acquired the last 3 or 4 years. I think back in 2018, the firm decided to create this subsidiary that focused on digital transformations, on really accelerating ideas and not just driving innovative ideas, but how do you actually operationalize those? How do you make them real? How do you actually provide significant value to the customer? How you provide improvements for the employees and how they do business and how they scale that. We are actually working close partnership with the larger Capgemini team, but in general, we'll do those short-term, agile, quick acceleration of value and growth for the customers. And our focus is on the long-term sustainable partnerships, especially all the disruptions that the industry is facing. And we're there and we have the capabilities and teams to address all that.
So interesting. How long is a typical engagement? Is that something you can talk about?
Again, so we typically like get in the door, expand for more. So our goal is to that crawl, walk, run approach to innovation. And really that 12-week engagement is our first starting point in relationship with our typical clients to really pinpoint the challenges, the opportunities, and the gaps, and then define that longer-term roadmap together. It's a matter of having the right experts in the room, the right understanding of the industry, and the right understanding of the capabilities that are out there from a technology perspective.
So in this journey, as customers get started, Brandon, with the early engagement of 12 weeks, where do they go from there? So is this initially, are these customers mostly customers who don't have an innovation process in place, or do they have something in place? How does this play out?
It's a combination of those two. So it could be a more mature organization that actually has a dedicated innovation team that really does, but they don't have the foundational framework of funneling those innovative ideas into something tangible, something real. How do you build those to a backlog? How do you actually prioritize those? How do you actually then go ahead and build those from an agile perspective into real work products that actually will result in a solution? So we've seen those clients in that journey who have some maturity in the space, and they need some help and an advisor, a partner to guide along that journey, given that framework and foundation you need. There are other organizations that are just delving into it, but they really need to brainstorm what innovation means to them and what it means to operations. They need a lot more support from us from a advisory perspective and actually all the capability they need to get innovation started. There are different paths, and it's very unique per client, per sector. We can talk more about it later, where I see some sectors are a lot more advanced than others in the retail industry.
Perfect. Now, in terms of an overall adoption perspective, as customers are going through your engagement and getting an understanding of what they want to be doing and what are the priority, what percentage, or like at a higher level, what is the adoption rate like going forward? They make it like an ongoing, and they have because that's one of the challenges with innovation, right? Sometimes it becomes a very project-based compared to it becomes a lifetime practice in the company.
Right. Yeah, I think that strategic mindset shift is taking it, disembowel it from being a project-based methodology to really looking at it from a product or initiative perspective. What is the business challenge we need to solve? What is the customer experience enhancement we're trying to actually produce? And you think of it in terms of actually building a product or a service or a capability versus a project. That's what we're trying to do. That's what our main goal is with the clients we work with, is to become more projectized, to be more customer-centric, and to actually produce things that will add value for the customer, to drive business growth and revenue, and actually help enable the workforce to be more effective and productive.
So when a client comes to you initially, man, I want to ask what percent. I mean, I want to do the analyst thing and figure out exactly what the percent of innovative retailers is still in retail. We used to talk about it being 3 to 4% of retailers would be truly innovative, or at least cutting edge and leading edge, and then 25% fast followers, 50% mainline, and then the dreaded slow adopter. So when somebody knocks on your door, are they already innovative? Do they want to become innovative?
Yeah, good question, Jeff. I think they've committed to their team. Do they committed to the shareholders that they want to become more innovative? They have some ideas how they want to approach it in some cases, but they don't have that full structure. They don't have that prioritization that they need to become more innovative. And most critically, they haven't embedded innovation as part of all the capability units, whether it's a supply chain perspective, store operation perspective, merchandising, assortment planning, pricing. Having innovation as a standalone operation is doomed to fail. So you have to incorporate and embed innovation and a customer-first mentality across the entire organization. Otherwise, it doesn't result in anything substantial, in my mind.
So that means, Brendan, this probably also will, I think you made a really great point. That means this also needs to be like a very C-level driven initiative or a board level driven initiative. Is that what you're currently seeing in the industry, the ones that succeed?
The ones that succeed, yes. As long as that top-down direction, that executive sponsorship, because ultimately it comes down to the people component. Yes, people, there's process technology. The people component, in my mind, is most critical. And in my experiences, where all transformation innovation initiatives fail is when they don't get people to adopt and evolve and pivot to the changes or embrace it.
Totally agree. And that's one of the things that Jeff and I cover a lot in our podcast as well, because that has been one of the challenges in innovation. So as you are in this journey, like how are leaders like adapting it? Are you seeing scenarios where, it starts with an innovation team who actually starts this engagement with you? Or does it start at the board level? How is it propagating through the company? What is like the general practice?
In my experience, it typically is now an innovation team. In the past, like the last several years, it was a board directive initiative and it was a more enterprise-wide. But now we're seeing these smaller teams, more agile teams, such as an innovation practice that you mentioned, right? Where now they're coming with funneling ideas and they work with the cross-functional teams and they're coming with value-added incremental things they can do to improve customer experience, to improve how they operate. That paradigm shift from that long-term transformation and those 2 to 3 year engagements where there's a substantial investment of time and people, capabilities, and there's a cost component to it, not realized value. We're seeing those actually dissipate and actually evolve into that agile, that really clear, concise path to value. And it's more incremental. Give the customer what they want, try to pivot to where the customer behaviors are going, and also enable your workforce, both at the store level and the corporate offices, to be able to respond and react more predictably. So if you can provide incremental value versus longer term engagements, that's where we're seeing things go directionally.
Perfect. So one thing here, Brandon, I think what we've seen in the past, I'm sure you guys have seen this in Capgemini as well, like when these innovation initiatives are initially set up and rolling across the organization, that like how do they actually set the expectation of what the transformation or the initiative would do, right? Because the setting up these KPIs in 2-year engagement or 2-year investment in innovation would yield XYZ, or the innovation team that they hire would yield XYZ. How do you guys have a framework and something that you help your customers think through this thing? What are you seeing generally among clients in terms of, because sometimes some folks underset the priorities and claim victory soon. So others overset the priority and fail. And others have no priority and then they come back and say, figure out what to do. What are you seeing and what do you recommend? What are your practices?
Yeah, great question, Roy. I think what we're seeing is they'll have an idea holistically where they want to go, or they have a real strategic focus for, say, the supply chain. We need to digitize the supply chain. We need to do workforce enablement at the store level. And then they will drive a certain KPI or what they consider a metric they wanted to go up against. But the challenge is, what are all the epics and the features and those products and services they need to produce to enable that growth, to enable hitting those targets. And that's where we come in as those advisors and experts to accelerate value. We have these accelerated frameworks. We have the AI innovation framework. We have also in our practice, we have a mix of folks who are in the industry. But now we have a design house. We have fraud. We have innovation teams. So we have a very robust and comprehensive approach to innovation. And the most critical part is how do you prioritize and how do you actually enable innovation to come to life? And that's where the rubber hits the road.
You can't set that up and leave it. How do you prioritize? That's the game. Do you start at the function level, like supply chain or merchandising? Do you start at the CEO level, or do you start at the CEO level? How do you do this?
It's definitely top down, but we actually want to break it out to more tangible ways of doing things. So we'll actually build value streams where we'll have a supply chain team, we'll have a customer service team, we'll have a accounting team, risk and compliance, whatever they may be. And within those value streams, we'll have these cross-functional folks who say, these are the high-level epics you want to actually come up with. These are the three top goals for the next quarter you want to achieve. Then how do we do that? By actually building these 10 features. These 10 things actually will help us achieve those goals. But it cannot happen unless you have a cross-functional team involved. So we're looking at your VP level, your director level of supply chain, your VP of merchandising, your VPs of operations, and they will work together and collaborate in a very agile way. These are the 3 things that to focus on, and these are the 20 things we actually produce tangibly to actually enable these things to come to life. So the goal is that you have to continuously improve. So innovation is not a static experience for these retailers. They need to actually incrementally add more in. So if you produce one thing, a new feature for a mobile device or their native apps, you actually have to keep evaluating, assessing how it's going, see how it's performing against their KPIs, and then see if there's any revenue growth or any EBITDA improvements have come out of that. And then you continue to evaluate, and then you go through the whole cycle again and go to that backlog, that prioritization of innovation imperatives, and then keep that cycle going. So it's not a static thing. It's not a 2 or 3 year roadmap. It's a continuous cycle of innovation. And the most successful retailers who are able to pivot and adjust to the market conditions have this cadence in place. But if they don't, so Capgemini Invent is that trusted partner.
So let me ask you a really tough question. When you're done after about 6 months to a year, is the retailer spending less money or more money on whatever solution you're working on?
Less, because there's a significant cost overhead in running these operations. Where we see innovation teams that are not efficient, they're not prioritizing the work. So once that efficiencies kick in, once the teams get into that cycle of that continuous improvement, that come up with those features and those new service capabilities, there's a lot more efficiencies and scale that comes out of that. And the goal is to actually, we want to walk away, transfer all our knowledge to them. So we empower them. They have the knowledge they need, the capabilities they need, the frameworks they need to accelerate innovation. So essentially, their costs will go down of running the operations, and their value will go up because they're incrementally producing these new ideas and concepts and actually operationalize versus going to a Excel spreadsheet for later.
Yeah, that's always been one of my bugaboos, being the forecast guy on retail IT spend, is the idea that success always had to equal increased IT spend. And when you're dealing with 2 million retailers, 500 tier 1s and thousands tier 2, and then millions in tier 3 through 5, it's hard to make that case. But I always try to get away from using that as the sole benchmark. If you needed to use that number to justify IT spend, awesome, fine. Do whatever you want with my data. But don't always assume that more IT spend means a better functioning organization. It just might mean a much more leaky boat. So that's interesting. Interesting.
Good point, Jeff. We've seen so many inefficiencies. There's legacy IT debt, old infrastructure. We talk about the no code, low code. If you can only imagine some of the challenges and nightmares I've seen out there from an architecture perspective. So I think that's another opportunity is to really clean their architecture up, streamline it in a way that this retailer can actually de-invest in the old architecture and reinvest in something that actually provide value. And that's provide that intelligence to the analytics and visibility to data, visibility to trends, and to be able to track and then forecast properly. Those elements are still out there. And there's still plenty of companies with 20 or 30-year-old architecture that's patched together to somehow operate.
I'm really proud. You said low code, and Brian didn't scream overtly over his mic. So thanks, Brian, for not doing that. Oh, he got a big smile on his face. That'll tell you for sure. Dean, I'll ask you another tough question. Feel free to punt on this. And it goes back to my experience bringing in a WMS system when I was 25, and I made the very stupid mistake of suggesting to a couple of people that, this is going to be a lot more efficient. And those people actually made money in it being not efficient. And I learned a very good lesson as a very young warehouse leader.
Yes.
I got to assume there's people making money with inefficiency. So when you come in and you say, hey, listen, I assume you don't lead with that. But how do you navigate those waters?
You have to look at their processes, and you actually have to sit down with them and have a face-to-face conversation with these leaders and these functional experts. Tell me about your day, your life. Tell it, what do you go about doing this process? How do you actually do it? What tools do you use? What's missing? What are you doing offline? I mean, you assume we live in this fully integrated cloud work-based world where everything's connected seamlessly. That isn't the case. Excel, unfortunately, is the best friend out there of the industry. It has not gone away, and for the foreseeable future, it's not. But the goal is to get that fully integrated platform where everything's visible, everything's transferable, everything's in a cloud-based place so you can slice and dice the data. And that doesn't exist necessarily. So we look for those inefficiencies, those gaps. We want to actually respect the work they've done because they've been successful for decades. And they do have this knowledge that really matters. So what can you take from their current processes and determine what could be enhanced and optimized, and what could we do to make it better connected and more efficient? There'll be cost savings, but also be new ways to do business and drive new revenues, increase revenues.
Yeah. The other thing I think also, Jeff, what we've actually seen in a lot of these circumstances is that there is so much legacy in there that a lot of these brands and retailers can't replace legacy that fast, right? That's where this upskilling and low code, no code type platform comes in, as long as it is architecturally scalable, right? Which one of the things that we focus at Iterate and Interplay, right? To provide an architecturally scalable platform, you can actually create business services that you can create a service layer that you can build on top of that is also continue to scale as a business, right? Because that's one of the challenges, because the rip and replace is not that easy within enterprises. That's one of the challenges and the other problems is a lot of times IT already has a lot of built-in priority. They in this Amazon style one-way gate projects versus two-way gate projects, right? Some of these long projects that take years, like the one-way gate projects, are hard to convince leaders to go through. So that's why I think this bridge building is a big part of the business.
I completely agree. It's truly a mindset shift because IT organizations are just naturally tuned to think operationally. The tasks they need to run, maintain the systems, the infrastructure, keep the business going, which is all crucial. But then there's the innovation side of the house. So it's really focused on that value-added components, the customer experience enhancements, and how to become more digital, more connected. So it requires a robust, I would call it change management or change enablement. And that's where we can come in as well as a Capgemini organization with our workforce enablement team to help organizations pivot and shift. It's not just about technology. It's not about the tools, the capabilities, it's the people that has to make it happen and the mindset shift to get there.
Yeah, agree.
Do you have to be leading edge or bleeding edge to be innovative?
I think there's an inherent amount of risk. If you go bleeding edge or leading edge, I think that it is how risk adverse is the organization. They're willing to take those risk or calculated risk, then certainly you can go there. But if you're not in an industry that's changing day to day, or if you're not in an industry that requires that leading edge innovation, it's definitely a risk evaluation has to be done there. Can you pilot it? And our recommendation is can you really pilot things and measure and test the results? You want to do a full-fledged program where you're going chain-wide with the innovation component. Rather, you want to actually pilot a district or a region or actually a department, test and measure the results, and you can be a little less risk. It can be more risk-averse that way. You also be able to scale out quicker once you actually prove the results.
Yeah, what's also interesting, Jeff, there is the risky equation. And Brandon, let me know if you agree or you have different comments. Is that the risky equation that applies to a traditional business process also applies to innovation, right?
Yes.
What is the biggest bank you can get for the bang for the buck?
Exactly. That risk reward principle, we all heard about it. So that's an evaluation we'll do with firms, and we'll do that financial modeling to see what the cost components are, what the incremental things we need to add, and then new solution capabilities and tools and frameworks to add, and what the expected results will be from a revenue perspective, that lift, that increase of margin, increase of EBITDA. So that's something we'll actually work to ensure that prioritization of these imperatives goes through. That is the financials and quantifying things as a way to actually manage risk and mitigate it.
What emerging technologies are you particularly bullish on? Let's say maybe out 18 months.
For retail, I'm all in on social selling, on the metaverse engagement.
Oh, that's a whole separate conversation we're going to have for sure. But social selling. So define that a little bit. What do you mean by social selling?
So social selling is that connect consumer.
Yeah.
We live in an age where everyone's perpetually connected to a device, and we have to go where the customer's going. And we highly recommend our clients to connect and engage with really authentic content across social media channels. They want to actually convert this customer, make that experience seamless and intuitive for the customer, whether they're on Instagram or TikTok. But you have to actually have all the supportive processes and infrastructure in place to make that happen, to be mobile first, digital first, and customer first. But it's all about storytelling. It's all about being authentic as a brand. Those technologies are fascinating to me. And from a retail operational perspective, I'm all in as an ex-planner and a buyer. If I had the tools that are available today, I think of the wonderful things I could have done as a merchant and a planner back in the day. So AI, predictive analytics, machine learning are truly groundbreaking. And if we can start introducing those to the industry, we get ahead of the curve, especially in an industry that's been fully disrupted by the supply chain challenges globally, by the impacts of the pandemic, by now the inflationary periods. Now we're seeing so many retailers, big-size, large-size retailers, who are overwhelmed with inventory because they overcompensated, because they want to have a contingency stock in place in case they don't have the inventory. So if they could be a bit more predictive, have more analytics at their disposal, maybe they would be in this situation, they're predicament they're in now. We need to mark things down.
So let's go back to the metaverse conversation. We got into an interesting discussion, a little /debate yesterday on Clubhouse, talking about the different cuts on the metaverse. I think I know where you're coming from, but unpack your thinking a little bit. Pros and cons, what's real, what's not real, and how should retail executives be thinking about this thing, this blob that we've now packed a lot of things around called the metaverse?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of hype out there. I think how you actually make it real. The fact is, the emerging customers coming up, whether they're Gen Alpha or Gen Z or even the millennials, they have the power and authority of discretionary income. And they're in the gaming world and they're in this environment already. Why not try to engage with them through the metaverse and with something authentic and interesting? And that will help drive them to actually engage with your brand more. So if you could do it in a way that's unique and that's going to really resonate with this generation, and certainly that's another sales channel or engagement channel. It may not lead to a purchase yet, but it actually will lead to a good experience or something that's actually drive to stay with your brand. And we've seen Nike has delved into it in that marketplace, as well as Gucci, Louis Vuitton, and others in the luxury space. So again, these firms are really focused on innovation and customer experience and digital already. So the metaverse, that next logical step of that journey, that evolution. And we go where the customer is, go where they're actually engaging. It's not going to replace the brick and mortar stores where still 85 to 88% of the sales are happening. It's not going to replace the native apps, and social selling through social channels certainly is going to continue. But the metaverse is the next evolution in my mind. I think there's so much potential there.
Yeah, I would agree on that. And so as we navigate through some of these conversations we've had in Ricardo's room on Clubhouse, and depending on whether somebody's either too hyped about it or not hyped enough. If somebody's too hyped, I guess as a good analyst, I want to go the other way. If somebody's underhyped, then I want to look, there's real technology there. There's without a doubt real technology. Will it all add up into some crazy thing where you and I walk through a virtual store looking at monkeys or something? I don't know. That I'm not interested in. Do I want to kind of experiment with a kayak at REI, kind of testing through different rapids? Heck yeah, I want to do that. I want to do that in a heartbeat. And we're already doing that. It's called flight simulation. So we've had pilots have been doing this for 30 years. I don't know. It's just it's that one technology that I've seen in an awful long time where it just seems like it's a hot button issue on either side. Either, it's all nonsense or it's the greatest thing ever. And everything, it's somewhere in between.
Yeah, I think it might end up going through the hype cycle as well.
Brian, everything goes through the hype cycle.
What I mean is a lot of the brands, the big brands are trying this out as marketing campaign. That's like most marketing campaigns end. They have an end date on it. And then once they end, if enough campaigns don't actually yield the right benefits, then the traditional metric and the math that most marketers use, they will measure it by the yardstick and say, hey, it didn't work well. Then it'll go through the valley of disillusion for a while, and then the few will catch on. And eventually, there may be business cases written saying if you did really well,
Yes.
then they may think about like platforms from that point onwards. So I think this is one of those, just like everything else. I don't think it'll fail. I think it's there to stay. But I think there is also probably a valley of dissolution coming pretty soon.
It's the trough of disillusionment, not the valley of the shadow of death, the trough of disillusionment.
The trough of, yeah, exactly.
I'd have my
It
card.
could be a hurricane or a storm or or even just a rain shower. It doesn't matter.
Oh, it's probably all of the above. So Brandon, what would you tell somebody if they came, and I'm sure every retail executive has to have bumped into this word a ton. What's your advice? How do you deal with some of the hype, and then how do you get, I want executives to put their hands on technology and experiment it in a controlled experiment, become comfortable with failure. That's my big, I've been begging for 20 years. Accept failure if you do it smartly, but this idea that you can't, and that's from very personal experience. If you can't fail at a project, then you can't succeed. And I think that's been retail's biggest stumbling block is this fear of failure. So what's your counsel for somebody that's trying to understand what they should be doing with it?
In my mind, if you keep every single focus, every single initiative on the customer and your customer experience, you have to do whatever it takes from a strategy and execution perspective to keep your customer engaged and satisfied. The customer loyalty right now is the most challenging aspect of the relationship. How do you retain these customers? It's going to require boldness. It's going to require an element of risk. It's going to require innovation. If you are not willing to take a chance or strategic risk to actually drive that engagement and keep that customer coming back for more, you're doomed to be obsolete. And the retention cycle is the most challenging aspect right now, because the customers will find there are ways of losing customers that didn't exist before. They have a bad experience on the social channel. They have a bad experience with your e-commerce engine or your mobile app. Or in general, something didn't work the way they expected from a product perspective. So you cannot afford as a retailer not to take those calculated risks and drive the innovation imperative forward. And you have to be willing to take a loss. And we've seen obviously the big guys like Amazon, Target, Walmart, innovation first. And you'll see them, some of the initiatives never came to fruition. Some that actually failed. It didn't resonate with the customer. They have the capacity and the capital investment to do that. But every single retailer has to have a similar mentality. And it's always day one right now because the customer is changing so dynamically and so aggressively. You can't afford to be stagnant. You have to actually take these risks to either be relevant or to be vital forward. You can't assume everything's going to be stacked the way it was and that your loyal customers will stay with you.
Hey, as a retailer looks around their organization, if they listen to this podcast and they go and look around their organization, what are a couple of telltale signs that they need to do something different?
Biggest sign I'm seeing is really within the organization, there isn't an awareness of innovation. There is an awareness of these new ideas that they've enveloped and absorbed and running the business the way they did the last 10 to 15, 20 years. That they're really risk averse or that they're not willing to take on these new challenges, or innovation isn't embedded within all the functions I talked about, like supply chain or merchandising or store operations or e-commerce. We need these groups to work together and break the silos down, actually collaborate and come up with new ways together, new ways to do business, new ways to engage with customers, and new ways of actually driving innovative ideas to reality. This has to be a crucial imperative for retailers who are facing price compressions, increased costs, their global supply chain disruptions, gas prices, you name it. And so they cannot afford to avoid innovation and the criticality of it.
Yeah. And add a labor strike at the Port of Los Angeles, which is on our future, I think. As we wrap up, I like to ask every one of our guests 2 questions. What advice would you give to young entrepreneurs?
Never stop learning. Never stop being able to take risk and take calculated risk. As you're an entrepreneur, you have that runway to take calculated risk to actually do what an innovation leader has to do. Take risk, actually see where it goes, and just continue to pivot as professionals. If the one thing doesn't work out, you have the chance to actually change your approach and try something else. And then be a lifelong learner, but also know the power of your network. You really find ways to help each other get through things together, be more collaborative and be more open to new ideas. And I think learning is the most crucial part for a young professional, is to learn as much as possible, as quickly as possible, and apply those learnings, but always be willing to take on new ideas.
And finally, what skills that you use now do you wish you would have paid more attention to back either in college or at the early part of your?
I think the softer skills. I think we were so focused on running the businesses, doing the everyday work, but the softer skills, 90% of what we do is actually engaging with clients, engaging with leaders. And I had the approach I have today, or the understanding, or the depth and breadth of knowledge of how to deal with people. We can become more effective as professionals. I think there were some rough patches. We all got through that in the early part of our careers. And I think if I had that savviness, that understanding that the people component is the most crucial part, I think it would have been nice to have that knowledge back then.
For sure. That's probably a good place to put a pin in it. Brandon, hey, thanks so much for this conversation. I definitely going to be following up either in Clubhouse or maybe getting you on the pod again as you get more experience working with retailers. I think you're at the center of what has to happen, this whole transformation, this whole push towards innovation. And I definitely want to learn a lot more from you and your experiences. Thanks for jumping on the show today.
My pleasure. Thank you, Jeff. And thank you, Brian. Look forward to the next podcast.
Yeah, thank you, Brandon. Take care.
Thanks for tuning into today's episode. For more info, refer to the pod notes below. If you enjoyed this episode, please consider giving us a 5-star rating and review. It really helps us grow. I'm your host, Jeff Roster, analyst at large. If you want to connect, follow us on Twitter at JeffPR or at Brian Sathianathan, or connect with us on LinkedIn. Visit my website at roster.retail.com or Brian's at iterate.ai. Until next time, stay safe and have a great week.